Today I'm going to share all of my video settings on my Sony A6600 camera, and in order to do this I'm literally just going to go through the entire video menu system on the camera itself. So if that's too nerdy for you, then feel free to just wait for next week's video, but if you do stick around at the very end, I'm going to share all of my custom buttons and what I've got them assigned to. Plus I'm going to mention my favorite setting on the A6600, and it's kind of a weird one to have as a favorite, but I like it. So yeah, let's jump onto the camera itself and we'll go through the menus. All right, so here we are on my camera in the video settings, and we'll just go straight through it. So first up, we've got exposure mode. I always keep my exposure on manual. I just like to be able to control all the different aspects and all the different settings, obviously, which is why we're going through this video. File format, I usually will have it on 4K. I'll shoot all my videos and upload them to YouTube on in 4K. But if I want to do slow-mo, I have to bump it down to HD to get the 100 frames per second. But otherwise, normally I'll just be shooting in 4K, 25 frames per second, and I'll have it set to 100 megabits a second, just so I can get the maximum amount of data to edit with. S&Q, if you're not sure what S&Q is, it's basically just a way of recording slow-mo or time lapses within the camera. But I actually never use this function, so I just leave that where it is. Proxy recording, I don't use currently. Autofocus drive speed, I always have it on normal. Autofocus tracking sensitivity, I just have on standard. A lot of these things I'll just leave on default. So auto slow shutter, default off. Initial focus magnification, default 1 times. Now audio recording I'll always have on, obviously, because I'm recording talking headshots, and I'll even leave it on when I'm recording B-roll, just because, you know, why not? But the audio record level is something I definitely pay a lot of attention to. So currently you can see my voice coming through on the camera microphones, but normally I'll have my Rode VideoMic Pro plugged in, and I'll always want to just make sure it's not peaking, but I'm getting decent levels within the camera itself. So at the moment I'm finding somewhere between 2 and kind of 10 is good with the Rode VideoMic Pro, depending on whether I have the gain boost on the mic itself. So yeah, I use the audio record level setting a lot. Next up, we have the audio level display. I always have that on, again, just so I can make sure I can see where my audio levels are, and that I'm not peaking or I'm not too quiet. Audio out timing, leave to live. Wind noise reduction, I don't shoot outside in wind, really. I kind of want to try some more talking head stuff outdoors, but for now I just shoot all my stuff indoors, so I'll just leave that off. Marker display, now marker's actually kind of cool, because you can put up things on your display, things like a center marker, aspect ratio, so different types of aspect ratios, so if you're shooting for that. A safe zone, guide frames, that kind of thing. But I don't use these. I just leave them off, because the only one that I really use is rule of thirds, and that's in a separate spot. So I just leave markers all off. Movie with shutter, that basically means I can record movies with the shutter button, and I definitely leave that on, because then I can hit the shutter button if I'm filming myself, rather than having to reach right around to the other side of the camera to hit the movie record button. The E-front curtain shutter, I don't really know what that is, so I just leave that on. Release without lens, release without card. That just basically means your shutter will open and start recording something, even if you don't have a lens on your camera or if you don't have a card in the camera. And to me, that's kind of pointless, so I just disable it. Steady shot is the inbuilt in-body stabilization in the Sony A6600, and I leave that on because I always like my shots to be as stable as possible. I actually realized recently you can adjust the stabilization to match your particular lens or your particular focal length. So I'm going to try this a bit more, I think. I have to remember it, but you can set it to pretty much any focal length you want, and then the stabilization will match that focal length. So otherwise you can just leave it on auto, which is what I usually do. Next up, we have zoom setting. Currently I have a lens that's just a prime, but I usually have optical zoom only just turned on. I don't have any need for digital zoom. If I want to zoom in, I just zoom in or crop in in post. Now, display button just shows you the different screens that your display will show when you press the display button. So for me, I like to have 3 different information overlays on my display, and I'll show you them on the actual display itself. So the first display I like to have is, it basically has all the info of all the settings that are currently on my camera, and this is just a good way for me to check that all my settings are correct. I'm ready to shoot. So that is the first one. The second one I have is just more of a clean feed, so it just gets rid of all those settings and I can see my frame more clearly. It's just a good way of making sure my shot looks good. And then finally, I like to have a level overlay, and this just helps me make sure that my shot is nice and level and it's not like, you know, completely off center or off tilt or whatever, which just saves me a bit of work in post. So I always like to have the level on. So that is the display button settings for my monitor. The finder I actually don't use, so we'll skip that because I have the finder disabled. Finder frame rate, again, I have the finder disabled, so it's not relevant to me. The zebra settings, I do have zebra display turned on, and then I've got it set to 104, which I have heard, I need to double check this, but I think that's the lower limit for S-Log2 footage. So if it goes over that in terms of brightness on S-Log2, that's when it will start to peak on the zebras. So I mentioned before the rule of thirds grid I like to use, so grid line, I have that turned on. You can't actually see it through this recording on HDMI, but on my display I can see a rule of thirds grid. Exposure set guide, leave off, and then auto review I leave off as well, just because I don't really need to review my footage or review my footage on my computer. So that is all of my main settings on my camera to do with video. So now we're going to go through some custom keys. So these are how I've got my camera currently set up with custom keys. And this is one of the things I really like about this camera, is the ability to customize different buttons to different settings that you use regularly. So if we go into here, the first custom button I've got is the zebra display select. So that just turns my zebras on and off, depending on whether I want to see them or not. And then number 2 is the gamma display assist. Now, if you haven't heard of this, I mentioned at the start of my video that I was going to talk about my favorite setting on the Sony A6600. And this is a super basic setting, and a lot of cameras have it, but I really love it. And it's gamma display assist basically means that when you're shooting an S-Log, obviously an S-Log color profile is really flat, low contrast, desaturated, and it just doesn't look great. And so it's hard to know if your shot is going to look good in post. So what Gamma Display Assist does is it converts on your screen in real time from the S-Log2 color profile and look to a more of a regular Rec 709 saturated contrasty color. And this just helps you to make sure that your shot is going to look good no matter what, but it still records that S-Log2 footage to your SD card. And I think it's great. So yeah, I've got that set to my custom button number 2. Number 3 is my audio record level, because I'm always just double checking my record levels for audio, making sure I'm not peaking or too quiet. And then 4, I don't have anything, because those 3 are kind of the main ones that I like to have within quick and easy reach. Now on the wheel, I have just everything default. So 1 is focus, 2 is drive mode, and 3 is ISO, and then 4 exposure comp. On the top, I have the picture profile. So occasionally I will want to go out of S-Log2 and just shoot in regular, or I might want to take a photo, for example. So I have number 1 on top set to picture profile, and then number 2 is peaking display. So this enables me to see if I'm in focus or not. And sometimes I just want to see what my frame will look like without sort of red lines all over it. So I always have that handy on my number 2 button. And then on the lens, we've got a focus hold, but that doesn't really apply. And then lastly, we've got my aperture and shutter speed rotate set to normal, the dial wheel set to off, the dial wheel EV comp set to off. Movie button records a movie always, no matter which mode I'm in. Dial wheel lock is set to unlock, and audio signals off, just because I don't like the beeping and that kind of thing when I'm recording. Prefer my camera to just be silent the whole time. So that is pretty much everything. I'll just quickly show you lastly what happens when I press my function button and what I've got set to. Quick change on my function. So first up, I've just got the focus mode. I can do either autofocus or manual focus. Then I have the focus area, my ISO, which is what I use quite regularly, metering mode, the exposure mode, my white balance, which again I do use quite regularly. I usually just use preset custom white balances for my YouTube setup, and then I'll adjust the Kelvin temperature depending on the room if I'm shooting B-roll, for example. The flash comp, which actually I should probably change, not gonna lie, just because I don't use flash at all. And then finally, my picture profile. So again, if I do want to change picture profile, I can do it from the function menu as well. So that is how I have my Sony camera set up for video settings. So that's how I've got my Sony set up for video. Hopefully you found that useful. If you just got the same camera, or if you're just, I don't know, looking at different people's settings, don't forget to check out my creative tech playlist if you're interested in more creative tech. And other than that, I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.